President Trump in Manila on Tuesday. Doug MillsThe, New York Times, Washington. President Trump on Wednesday boasted that nearly 10 months of his America First foreign policy had restored strength and respect to the United States on the world stage after years of what he deemed failed leadership under his predecessors. Hours after returning home from a 12-day, 5-country excursion to Asia with few concrete announcements, Mr. Trump nonetheless declared the trip a success in uniting the world against North Korea and insisting on reciprocal trade from Asian nations. America's renewed confidence and standing in the world has never been stronger than it is now, he said. This is exactly what the world saw: a strong, proud and confident America, announced with little notice and delivered in the early afternoon from the diplomatic room of the White House. The president's speech was designed to offer a sweeping and positive assessment of his own performance as the nation's commander-in-chief and top diplomat. In an expected 2,400-word speech, as described to the New York Times, Mr. Trump planned to sum up his accomplishments in his several overseas trips this year, making the case that America was once again playing a leading role in the world. America is back, he planned to say. That assertion flies in the face of critics who say Mr. Trump has abandoned the United States' status as a global superpower by retreating from trade agreements and backing out of the Paris Climate Accord. The president's political rivals accuse him of straining relationships with allies in NATO and elsewhere while embracing despots, including President Vladimir V. Putin of Russia. But Mr. Trump planned to use his Wednesday speech to rebut the charge, noting his efforts to rally Arab nations to fight terror financing during a trip to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, in the spring. The president was expected to boast that his tough talk with NATO allies has led those longtime partners to increase their commitments to the common defense of the alliance, a demand that Mr. Trump had been making since he was a candidate. He also planned to revisit his call, made during a speech in Warsaw, Poland, for a defense of Western civilization and to remind viewers of his insistence during a United Nations speech that countries around the world act to protect sovereignty. In talking about his own foreign policy achievements, Mr. Trump has often bragged about the personal relationships he has forged with his counterparts in China, the Middle East and elsewhere. But in Wednesday's speech, Mr. Trump hoped to highlight what his advisers believe were 3 successes during the just-concluded trip to South Korea, Japan, China, Vietnam and the Philippines: unite opposition to North Korea's nuclear ambitions, strengthen economic alliances and insist on fair trade. Critics of Mr. Trump's foreign policy have hammered him on all of those fronts. They argue that the president's use of childish names for Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader, has deepened the possibility of a nuclear crisis, not reduced tensions. And they say Mr. Trump's retreat from the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade agreement has robbed the United States of influence in the region. In fact, Mr. Trump ended his Asia trip without appearing to conclude any of the one-on-one trade deals with individual nations that he often said would be the hallmark of his administration. Despite that, Mr. Trump hoped to use the mid-afternoon speech to galvanize public opinion behind the idea that his leadership on foreign policy was restoring a new sense of optimism about America around the world.